Welcome back, ladies, gents and Pikachus, to another episode of the analysis and breakdown of the Quran of the Muslims. I love doing this. Yes, we're back once again to have a look at the words of Allah in the words of Allah and break down exactly what this guy is up to and what it means, what the Muslims are doing, which is described in this book, the Quran of the Muslims. What are they doing and how does that relate to today? How does it affect you and me as non-believers in the modern world? So before I start, if you have any doubts as to my factual accuracy or any of the things I'm about to tell you, please feel free to buy one of these from any good bookshops or off of Amazon, and you will find out that everything I'm saying is true to the Quran of the Muslims, as I keep telling you. So, if you've been keeping up with the series, where we left off last time is we've got past the whole Moses bit and the Egyptians and the Israelis bit. Now Allah has gone back even further than Moses. Now he's gone back to Abraham in an attempt to give his Muslims and the readers of his Quran of the Muslims more reasons to believe what he says, because he's extremely terrified. He's terrified and scared of the truth, and he doesn't want people to doubt him. And because he's declared actually several times, anyone who doubts him should be killed and hated. To make sure this isn't you, dear reader, he's giving you more reasons to believe what he says. Because obviously, Allah doesn't ever tell any lies, and it says so in here, so it must be true. So anyway, let's carry on from where we left off with Abraham. 102. Were you there when death appeared before Jacob? Behold, he said to his sons, who shall you worship after me? They said, we shall worship your God, the God of thy fathers, of Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac. So, this one's going to be fairly easy to break down. This is Abraham talking to God and his sons. So Allah is there as God. Abraham is talking to his sons. And now he's saying to his sons, were you there when death appeared before Jacob? Like, he's asking them a ridiculous question. Of course they weren't there. They weren't even alive when this happened. Not even in the, they weren't alive in the Torah when this happened, but even in this story, they weren't there. So he's saying to, he's trying to get them to stop questioning him. Abraham is saying to his sons, stop questioning me, believe what I'm telling you, and just shut up and listen. That's effectively how it's coming across. So he's saying, were you there when this happened? No, you weren't, so shut up. That's how this comes across. Were you there when death appeared before Jacob? No. Behold, he's saying to his sons, look, just listen to what I'm saying. This is the truth that you need to take on board. That's why he's saying that. Behold, he said to his sons, who shall you worship after me? So now he's saying to his sons, now that I've told you who you're going to worship forever, who are you going to worship after I die? Like, he's making sure they know, now that he's told them who they're going to worship, that they can say it back to him to prove that they've learnt it. Right? Behold, who shall you worship after me? And they said, we shall worship your God and the God of thy fathers, of Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac. So the God they're talking about is Allah, who just appeared to them a minute ago. Even though in the Torah, the Old Testament version of Genesis, when this is happening, the God who they're talking about is the God of Israel. It's not Allah. But anyway, because we don't want to get our heads cut off and we're in the position of a reader of the Quran who is a Muslim, we'll carry on. They're all dead. So ridiculous. So what's happening here? Allah's telling you, the reader, about this bit with Abraham, Jacob and his sons and how they're going to worship Allah after all these guys dead. So that's why Abraham is saying to his sons, who are you going to worship after I die? And the sons are saying, we're going to worship Allah. Then after that speech bubble ends, it goes back forward in time to you. So this is now Allah talking to you. Very confusingly written, but that's how he does it. Allah writes like an illiterate 7-year-old. Now he's going forward in time and he's talking to you. They're all dead now, awaiting paradise where they shall be glorified for their faith. Nobody will question what they have believed. So this is, let's break that down. This is Allah saying to you, all those guys we were just talking about, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Ishmael, the whole lot of them, they're all dead now, awaiting paradise. So what he's saying is, until the end times genocidal prophecy that we talked about in the last verse, until that arrives, These guys can't see paradise, so they're kind of they're in the lift, you know, they're in the elevator waiting for it to get to floor paradise. But they're definitely going to be glorified when that happens, and how that's going to happen is you have to do the things that I'm about to tell you. And just to make sure that you know you can't question me, nobody will question what these guys in the lift who are waiting for paradise did believe. Because I'm telling you that was true, and what they were doing, I'm telling you to do, dear reader, in the words of Allah. That's what this means. Did you keep up with that? I didn't, so let's go through it from the top. Allah first said to Abraham, believe this, and if you don't, you're dead. Then he said, tell your sons, and I'll make them the leaders of a great nation, and you, but not the evil Jews and Christians, so you have to tell your sons this. So then he goes back to his sons and he goes, I saw something amazing, you weren't there, you didn't see it, believe this thing that I'm telling you now, and he relays the message from Allah. Then Allah is talking to you, the reader, and says, those guys are all dead now, but the same thing that I told them before they died, that they told their sons before they died, that I'm telling you now is, believe in Allah and the Quran. And nobody should question this, because they didn't question them, they didn't question the sons, they didn't question Abraham, and it was always true. Nobody questioned it, you won't question it, fucking do it. That's what this means. I know, it's preposterous. But anyway, let's carry on. 103. They will say, they now is Christians and Jews. I know, we haven't mentioned them, but that is how it is written in here, and I've checked it online, that's exactly what this means. They will say, be you a Jew or a Christian, if ye be saved? And you will answer, no way. Abraham worshipped only Allah, not your pagan idols, say you. Allah's revelation to Abraham, Ishmael, Jacob, Moses and Jesus is true. Meaning only Allah gives these people scriptures. Everyone else who claims that they got scriptures or they've got some other God, they're all wrong. Only Allah gives the scriptures to Jesus, Moses, Jacob, Ishmael and Abraham. That's what it says. All those did worship only Allah, and we submitted. End of verse. So I feel like there's a lot to go through here, and there's no getting around it. It is fairly poorly written, and it takes a lot to get through, but let's try and unpick this big mess of literary retardation that Allah has written into his Quran. They will say, be you a Jew or a Christian, if ye be saved. So Allah now is talking to you, the reader, again, and he's saying, after you say this thing about praising Allah, after you say this thing about you have to believe it, Abraham believed it, his sons believed it, they've always believed it since the beginning of time, no one's ever questioned it, no one will ever question it, you won't question it, you have to believe it or else. When you say that to other people who aren't yet Muslims, they are likely to reply to you, dear reader, no, be you a Jew or a Christian if ye be saved. So that's what Allah is saying here. When you bring this ridiculous story about Abraham worshipping Allah throughout the ages and nobody ever questioning it, when you bring this to new people, dear reader, they are going to say to you, no, be a Jew or a Christian if you want to be saved. And you answer to that, no way. Abraham worshipped only Allah, not your pagan idols, you evil Jews and Christians. Then after that say you, so after you've said that, you don't let them finish or reply, or, you know, it's not a question you're asking them, you're telling these people, the evil Jews and Christians, no way, Abraham worshipped only Allah, not your pagan idols, you idiot Jews and Christians. And then you carry on, you don't let them speak. Allah's revelation to Abraham, Ishmael, Jacob, Moses and Jesus is all true, meaning only that Allah is the one that made the scriptures for those guys. So even if Jesus tells you he gets his scripture elsewhere, no he doesn't, he gets it from Allah. If Moses tells you he gets his scripture elsewhere, he's lying, he got it from Allah. Ishmael, Jacob, Abraham, all these guys definitely got their scripture only from Allah, and it says so in the book of Allah. So Allah wrote the book of Allah, and so said Allah, so it must be true. And remember, you're not to question this. None of those guys before questioned it. You won't be questioning it, so it must be 100% true, so says Allah in the book of Allah. Legit? Anyway, let's carry on. 104. So if they believe as you Muslims do, they are righteous. But if not, they are totally wrong. Oh, this is so ridiculous. Let me start again before I laugh myself off this video. 104. So if they believe as you Muslims do, i.e. if they don't question Allah, they read the Quran and they just go along with it without question, they are righteous. But if not, they're totally wrong. Allah will back you against them in any arguments. What he's saying there, if we break it down, if you're a good Muslim, you believe this, like all those other guys did, Abraham, Jacob, Ishmael, Moses, Jesus, even though we aren't to Jesus yet because we're still talking about Abraham. So in fact, none of these guys have happened. Moses hasn't happened. Jesus hasn't happened. The burning bush, the Ten Commandments, none of this stuff has happened. None of these towns have even been set up yet. Abraham is literally a wild man running around in the woods with some weird prehistory religion where the only God that's ever been mentioned is Elohim to Abraham, and he hasn't even really formalized yet. He doesn't even know what God's name is. He's just calling him merciful. Literally, that's what Elohim is, like unnamed God of mercy. It's like what you call God when you don't know what his real name is. That's why it's called Elohim. So to say all your pagan idols that these guys are going to mention, these Jews and Christians are going to mention to you, is a bit weird because we're Abraham. Jews and Christians aren't a thing yet, Allah. And you know this because you've been bitching about them and saying you're going to kill them for like 3/4 of your whole book. But anyway, regardless of the preposterous backwards and forwards in time and the retardation that is written into this text, let's continue. So, if you believe, as the Muslims do, you're righteous and good and you'll go to heaven, you won't be killed. And if you don't, you have no doubts and you don't question anything, you're good and righteous. But if not, if you question anything, or if anyone brings you facts and logic and good arguments or scriptures other than this, no, you are totally wrong. Allah will also back you against these guys in any argument. So what he's saying there is, you're right in all situations, all of the time, against anybody, if you follow this. And anybody else who comes to you with questions or arguments or debates, if they aren't bringing you this, 100% of the time they're definitely wrong at any point, whoever they are, even if it's Jesus or Moses. That is literally what this is saying. He carries on. Islam was created by and for the true God Allah, and only he can write such wisdom, and he is who we did worship. So he's capping this off now to you, the reader, in the future, as if it's Abraham talking to you now, even though he was long dead. It's very confusingly written, but if this is to be believed, Abraham is now talking to you through the voice of Allah, through Allah's interpretation of Abraham to you, the reader, in the future. It's very confusing. Basically, Allah is telling you what Abraham would say if he was alive now, and what Abraham would say if he was alive now while he's waiting to go to paradise is, Islam was created by and for the God Allah, who is the only God, and we know this because only Allah is clever enough to write stuff like this, this Quran that you're not allowed to worship with, or you're not allowed to argue with, you have to worship. And because he's so wise and powerful, and we definitely know everything he says in here is true because he says so himself, and this is the proof of it, he is who we did worship. So in this situation, I don't think Allah and his angels are saying we worshipped ourselves, because that would just be insane. Well, maybe that is what it means, but I'm assuming that he's still in the place of Abraham. So what he's saying is, if we get there in a roundabout way, Allah is telling you, the reader, now that Abraham is telling you in the past that the reason everyone believes in Allah and will always believe in Allah and did always believe in Allah is because nobody but Allah is clever enough to write this book, even though it didn't exist back then. And Abraham clearly never read it because the language of Arabic which it was written in didn't exist until... Look, you get where I'm going with this. The whole thing is completely confusing. Obviously it was written in the future and then post-dated backwards. Everything was retconned to fit into Allah's little image of himself, that he's all-knowing and he can hear your thoughts and he can see the future and everyone always worshipped him and no one ever had any guts to doubt him. Nobody ever did anything but worship him or they're dead. And the reason we know this to be true is because Allah says so here, and if you argue, you're dead, like all the other ones apart from Abraham, Jesus, Moses, Isaac and Jacob, who clearly all worshipped Allah, even though the book wasn't written. Let's just move on. It's very confusingly written. The point of it is, Allah's trying to convince you that everyone throughout time worshipped Allah, and the reason they knew Allah was true because of Quran, even though the Quran wasn't written when those people were alive. So we know for a fact he's lying, but you can't question him or you're dead. So just believe it anyway, like Abraham tells you to from the past. It's literally what it says. If you don't believe me, buy it and read it. I'm making an Abraham of trying to explain the weird kind of dynamics of it, but you just can't make sense of it. That's why he keeps saying, if you question it, you're fucking dead. And there's no one in the past who ever questioned it, and there's no one who will be able to question it in the future. The reason why Allah keeps saying this, and then threatening, lying and cursing, and why his Muslims do that today when you question this, is because it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. It just doesn't, okay? Sorry, Muslims, your book doesn't stand up to scrutiny. I'm literally reading it word for word, verse by verse, in factual, basic terms. And what we are finding out, the reason why you can't have nice, friendly debates with us Christians and us Jews is because you would get flawed every single time. And the only way you know through Allah's command to argue with us is to lie, threaten, and curse. So let's carry on. 105. This is still Abraham talking to his children, if this is to be believed. And he's telling his children how to argue with Jews and Christians, despite the fact that those two groups are not going to come into existence for hundreds of years. Say, fear ye who would fear ye who would dispute our account of Allah, and Allah as your Lord. Everyone will be their own countenance in these disputes, since we are sincere in our fear of Allah. So, breaking this down, bearing in mind the nonsensicality of everything that went before it, this is going to be no easier. So Abraham is telling his children, fear ye who would dispute our account of Allah, as Allah is the Lord. So he's basically telling his children, right, anyone who disputes this should be terrified because we're going to kill them. And they should be terrified of Allah because Allah is going to command us to kill them. And Allah is the Lord. So we're not going to say no. We're definitely going to do it because Allah's real and he's God and he's telling us to kill them because they have disputes over his account of this, which isn't written yet. It's what it says. Everyone will be their own countenance in dispute, since we are sincere in our fear of Allah. What that means is everyone will be in their own countenance. Means it's your own fault if you argue or dispute this and then you die. It's nobody's fault but your own is what that means. Everyone will be their own countenance. Everyone will have to take the responsibility on themselves, no matter if they're a child, a woman, an apostate, a pagan, someone who's disabled and didn't know any better, someone who's drunk. It doesn't matter what your excuse is. It will be your own fault if you dispute this and then get killed. That's what this is saying. And the reason is we are sincere in our fear of Allah. See, we go back to this thing where Allah doesn't actually care about his Muslims. He wants them to live in total fear and subjugation, so they do exactly what they're told at all times and never question Allah. Because it says so in here, and he'll kill you if you don't. It's explicitly what it says throughout this book. Oh, is that the end? I think we've reached the end. So that's the end of our reading for today. I don't know why I've shortened it. It must be a really, really tough, chewy bit that we're coming up to next. But anyway, 19 minutes. This has been quite long enough. So let's just quickly summarise what we've gone through. So we're still talking about Abraham right at the beginning of the story, but it goes through fairly quickly. I think Allah's aware that he's going to lose his audience fairly bloody quickly if he doesn't get through this quickly, because it's fairly boring and nonsensical and annoying, if I'm quite honest. So let's get through it quickly. He starts off by saying to his children, this is Abraham saying to his children, were you there when death appeared to Jacob? No, you weren't. So what do you know? Nothing. You're children, you don't know anything. I'm going to tell you what to do next. You have to listen to me. I'm your father. Shut up and listen. And then he says, behold, just listen. Take in what I'm saying as fact. Listen to this. Then he says, who shall you worship after me? And they say, oh yeah, we'll definitely worship the same God you did. We won't have any dispute about it. We'll do exactly what you told us because all the other sons did it. Jacob did it. Moses and Jesus did it, even though they haven't been born yet. And there's going to be no dispute to that. So we will definitely do what you tell us, Pops. And we will worship Allah because Abraham did. Then the next bit is, they're all dead anyway, those guys. This is Allah telling you, they're all dead anyway. So even though they all agreed they're going to worship Allah and no one's going to dispute it, they're all dead now and it's still going. It's still going. Everyone's still worshipping Allah. Those guys are waiting in the elevator to get to paradise, which will only happen if you do this and you put into practice the end times genocidal prophecy where we kill all the apostates, Jews, Christians and everyone else, and it's only Muslims, remember that, you. And then if they argue, these apostate Jews and Christians, what they're going to argue with is this. They're going to say, you will only be saved if you're a Jew or a Christian. If you worship Allah, you won't be. And to them you say, no, you're completely wrong. Everyone has to worship Allah, not your crappy false gods and your pagan idols. And Allah's revelation goes as far as Jesus. Even though he hasn't been born yet, and this is Abraham talking to his kids, Allah is literally prophesizing all the other prophets to Abraham, who's never going to be alive to see them, so that Abraham can tell his kids, look kids, if you don't believe me, Jesus and Moses even agree. And if you don't if you don't believe me, ask them, even though you'll die long before they're ever alive. So I think the point that we're getting to in this short reading that seems very long but is not, is that Allah is so obsessed with making sure people have no reason to doubt him and actually don't want to doubt him because they know they'll get killed. He's so eager to give them evidence and proof of his divinity and his oneness that he's forgotten that these people are not going to be around to see Jesus, Moses, any of these guys. So there's no point saying to the children of Abraham in like year 2, millions of years before Christ, oh, this is definitely true, even Jesus will agree, and all Jesus' miracles, blah, blah, blah. There's no point saying this to the children of Abraham, because they're going to die, and then there's going to be like 1,000 years before Jesus is even born. So this tells me this is written for your benefit now in the future. Allah, when he's writing this, he's not writing it to tell Abraham's children about Jesus. He's not even writing it for his people in the time to prophesy Jesus. He's written this after Jesus has died and he's read Revelations and he's read the Christian Bible. He's writing this document in his Quran in 850 AD so that he can claim Allah knows all, that all those miracles that Jesus did were down to Allah, and so that you go and kill the Jews like he prophesied, because his people are not going to be around to do it and he needs to make sure somebody does. And that brings us to our final bit, where Abraham is back in the past speaking to his children, and he says, fear ye all who would dispute our accounts of Allah. So he's putting the fear of Allah into his children and saying throughout time, anyone who disputes Allah will die. And the reason is we have a sincere fear of Allah. So Allah is lying about this in his book then. For the benefit of you, dear reader, reading this today, Allah is indirectly telling you, everyone who worships Allah knows not to argue with it and doesn't bother with this Jew or Christian crap. They know that's false in the words of Allah. And the reason they don't dispute it is because Allah puts fear into them, and that fear is that he will come down on them like a ton of bricks if they dare to argue or question or dispute anything, and so should you. And that's the end of this video. So in conclusion, we have more evidence that Allah is retconning history. He's sat there with a copy of the Quran or the Torah. Someone's in his ear telling him in some way, whether he read it himself or someone else gave him that information. He's sat there with a copy of the Torah or someone telling him, and he's using that information to write the Quran to brainwash his Muslims and anyone else who will find it and read it into 3 things. Not worshipping the original God, who is the God of Israel, hating Jews and Christians and having enough reason to never accept their questioning or get into a debate with them because they might lose, and third, to fear Allah and worship him and his Quran. Otherwise, you're dead. You won't make it to the end times prophecy when we kill all the Jews in paradise, blah blah blah, 72 virgins. That's the end of this video. So tomorrow we'll be going through a little bit more detail of what happens to Abraham's lot after this happens, when they actually get to the stage of clearing the lands of the roads and putting the settlements out. And that will be a pig to get through as well. But we're going to get through it. We're definitely going to figure out what Allah is up to. He's not going to put us off with any of these crappy tactics. He's not going to bore us to make us lose focus. We're going to stay focused. We're going to understand what this guy is up to and how it affects us today. But we'll get to that tomorrow. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed that and you learned something. God bless, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now. And if you are interested to follow more of the deranged ramblings of Allah in the Quran of the Muslims, then come back tomorrow at 7:15 AM and we will continue our story then. Toodles!